Good morning, guys. We will be starting now. Are you able to see my screen, sir?
Yes, Karthik.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, guys, and thank you for joining this wonderful session. Right. So today we are on the day 3 of this internship program. So this is basically something we'll talk about. We have got basically we are adding. It's not the third week as per se, but there are a lot of other practical sessions we have done in the past, right? After week 1, week 2, we have done a lot of like firewall, and we spoke about SSH and other related activities we have worked on it. Okay. Today we'll be talking about DevSecOps, right, and why it is important and where it is heading towards, right? And there is a lot of buzz over DevSecOps and AI going to take up that opening, that job process and things. We'll talk a little bit of that also if someone is interested in the end. And then probably next week we're going to talk about cloud security, right? So DevSecOps, development security operations, basically what it is, right? So before we could go to DevSecOps, it is important for us to understand DevOps, right? So what do you mean by DevOps? Is it a set of process structure or what it is, right? So for me, so it can be a lot of, you will find a lot of, definitions and what it means in real-time scenarios. But for me, DevSecOps is predominantly a cultural approach, right? Not from an organization cultural approach where you're looking at things from a certain perspective, right? Where you're looking at things from a certain perspective. So what do you mean to say, right? So if you remember the older times, there was something called as a waterfall model, right? That was going to be used, and something as it moved on to agile methodology. Okay, moved on to agile methodology. And do you think waterfall model is not used? It is still used. I think Facebook have been moving back to waterfall model in a lot of projects and things like that. But we have to understand what it is, right? So in computers, we speak about this is whenever you're talking about a particular solution or a mindset or a methodology, there is nothing called as a wrong methodology and the right methodology. All right, depending on situation, the pattern changes. Similar to your data structures and algorithm, there is no bad algorithm or a right algorithm. There's depending on the situation, what is the requirement, the algorithm is going to change out there. Similarly, the early stages was waterfall model. And if we speak about here, understand this is the situation. It is not general public applications. Web applications are not developed for general public. It is being developed for large corporates, predominantly whom, right? It is going to be financial sectors. Financial sectors like bank and insurance. And in these are the situations where the requirements are not changing, right? So for instance, let's say the cashier related applications someone is developed, it is not going to change significantly in more 10
Don't
days.
have his social time.
You just want to play, you just have to give me my brochure.
Guys, can you put yourself on mute? Right? So requirements are not going to change.
You can just take it back over here to the mommy daddy room.
Right? So the requirements are not going to change. In those situations, waterfall model makes very good sense. Meaning what makes waterfall model? Because it has a straight set of steps. One is requirement collection, then it is going to be design, right? Then you're going to talk about code and implement, right? You can further divide this into much more detail, but this is what the process. So usually it is coming like a waterfall. So it is, they're calling it as a waterfall model out there. All right. So here, whenever the requirement changes are there, this is going to be for minimum. I've seen a waterfall model for 5 to 6 months. Right. A cycle is going to be 5 to 6 months. And this is very good approach when the requirements are not changing. Meaning, what is the requirement? What is the product is supposed to do? What is the functionality? For instance, calculator, the requirements is very simple. It should do addition, it should do subtraction, it should do multiplication, and it should do division. And more scientific calculator will have more different requirements of them. Right. Similarly, for an application is also the same thing. Right. When you go for an Amazon, you will have a customer facing certain requirements. When a customer search for a product, it should be there. And again, there will be separate login credentials and requirements for sellers as well, because they want to upload there what product is about, what they want to do, the advertisement and things. A lot of things are there. Remember, the waterfall model is basically for the larger organizations where things are not changing much, right? Banks and insurance are not. At that time, the requirements were stable. But as we moved away from 2000, right, towards 2020, 2015, or 20, even 2010, the requirements started changing drastically. Right. So, for instance, Amazon is no longer selling products in a simple pattern all throughout the year. They're having many festivals, right, sales and things and all. So the website should look different. They're constantly changing, right? For instance, they will have a different theme in the month of December, in the month of November, and month of October. Why? The Christmas is coming out there. It constantly keeps on changing out there. Amount of sales they will do here because of that particular festival is going to be very predominantly high. And especially I know that because I worked in, when I was in UK, I was in the Amazon packing facility. I was working as a part-time there. What if I missed, right? What if I missed the development deadline and I got, instead of introducing my changes in October, I came up in November, right? Or by the time I got the requirements has changed, the pattern has changed, a lot of things gets changed out there. So in those situations, waterfall model is very difficult. Why? I don't know what is happening to the product after 6 months time. I don't get that much more advantage out there and things and all. So in order to overcome this situation, right, I'm going a bit faster because this is not about DevOps, this is more about DevSecOps. So in order to make this, they took the requirements and divided into small chunks, right? Let's say you're having 20. They told first, let's deal with 3 requirements. And based on that, we are going to do. And this is where Agile comes into play, right? You're not taking a very large requirement. You're taking 3 requirements. Probably you're going to work on that for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right? So this is what you call as a Scrum or Agile, sprints, what you call out there. So it will take you short sprint, work on small amount of requirements, something wrong, you can go back and fix it, and probably have to requirement keeps changing out there. So the product cycle is continuous there, but you're getting a feedback much more earlier and things like that, right? So now this again, one more problem advantage out here they came is was the requirement was done. Then again, in DevOps, the testing process and the environment was reduced to everyone is having a constant. So for instance, we are using a Docker, so everyone is running at the same Docker in image. The development team, testing team, and production are running the same Docker environment. So you don't have to worry about my code working in my laptop or my system and it's not working in your process. That you're not going to worry about that. That is one thing advantage. And again, testing, lot of automation was introduced, right? Same process what is happening right now, the AI is going to take over a job out. When DevOps and automation came into place, same thing was discussed about. The point was at that time, yes, the testing jobs dropped significantly, but it gave openings to more DevOps jobs because it made the application development more cost effective. It means it is not that they will need less people. It means that they'll need more people because more people are able to can afford to have their own web application to their activities, right? So it's not. So again, a lot of things comes into play, right? But the problem here with this approach was with the DevOps was security, right? So DevOps did in a very short span of time, they were able to do development, design, right? And all those things were done out there. But always security, how do you do security? We're doing penetration testing and VAPT, all right? Vulnerability analysis of it. And this was done post application development. Post application development, it was done. The issue with this approach is that whenever the application goes into production, right, and I find there's a vulnerability here, the problem is going to be I cannot get the application to stop and fix it and things like that. In certain situations, it is going to be very, very difficult. And the cost, it is not identified. At the same time, penetration testing VA cannot be done every time the product is changing on that, right? Whenever a new code is added, new vulnerability could be introduced, right? A new vulnerability could be introduced out there. But the problem here is that I can't do VAPT often, right? It is a very expensive operation. At the same time, more expensive than our thinking from an expensive perspective. It is more of a time-consuming approach, right? Usually, even the compliance tell is that the minimum they can do is once in a quarter, or once in 3 months you can do it. But once this PTA is done, for another 3 months there's a gap, right? So there could be new vulnerabilities introduced, and we will not know about that part. So DevSecOps wanted to overcome that issue out there, right? What DevOps is what? DevOps predominantly the culture is to reduce human interaction, introduce automation out there. So DevSecOps basically is asking to introduce automation in the form of security. So meaning I should be able to do the process every time on my own out there. Right? I should be able to reduce the impact. So as we go further, we'll talk more detail into this, what exactly it means out there. So security as a code, continuous security, training and awareness, and shift left approach, right? So what is this process? What are the challenges that we speak about? Security challenges when we talk about DevOps, right? As one of the things we spoke about, once the product is deployed, the security testing comes into play, right? And this is taken as a middle point, right? This is taken as a middle point. The shift left approach is basically is that the deployment on the right side is what is happening in the security testing. So once it has been deployed, only then I'm doing the security testing. I want to do is to bring it as early as possible, right? Write down, actually, to be frank, even in the requirement phase, if we are specifying the security features, we are able to reduce the impact significantly out here. That is what is happening out there, right? So I don't want to introduce security after the application is live. I want to introduce the security in the earlier stages. That is the goal out here, right? So that is what DevOps comes into play, right? So DevSecOps, a contraction of deployment, security, and operations, is evolutionary leap in software development. This approach integrates security principles, practices, and tools into DevOps. Is to Its aim is to make everyone involved in the project accountable for security, to implement security decision and action at the same scale and speed as development and operation decision and action, right? So DevOps brought in a lot of speed the way the application was getting developed, and they wanted to introduce security was the bottleneck also, because once security takes in place, it cannot push it out there, right? That was a bit of an issue. So this is the main idea behind the DevSecOps, all right? So what are the advantages? Proactive security. By integrating security from start, potential vulnerabilities are identified and addressed earlier. Cost effective, speed and collaborative, right? So here, so we spoke about, right? These are the different. So what do you think is happening in the design phase? What is happening on the code? What is you then is been happening on the test phase? And what is that we can do to introduce it? Hmm? Just a second, guys. So we may be thinking, right? What is the process, right? What is the process of that? So let's look from an enterprise perspective. Usually what happens is, let's say I'm developing an Android application. Android app I'm developing out there. Predominantly, what are the things that needs to come? The end point of this app is there's going to be an APK file. Right. And again, there's an Android app is the one point. Another thing is also there's a web interface as well. Right. Web interface predominantly drilling for the admin process to be actions out there and done activities. So let's say in this part, I'm developing a simple app for challenge, right? Let's say it is could be something like a post-it kind of a thing, right? Where it will remind me to do certain activities, right? A remind activity application is there, right? And this is the application supposed to do. And in the app, when I open that app, I should be able to put my reminders in. It will give me a much more better approach to my traditional alarm systems that is already there, right? You can fit, tell you have to read a book if you want to read a run for some time or go to gym or do any activity, right? So all those things can be put up in that app and that is there. And again, for managing the user something, there's a web interface. So during this process, what is going to happen? The client, right, is going to interact with the development team, right? Is going to deploy the development team and is going to give the requirements. So you'll tell I want an Android app and this is the features it should have. All those things are going to be added out there, right? And once that part is done out there, then someone in the development team, an architect will be there. He is going to design the application. So what does happen in the design the application is deciding on the programming language. Probably they're looking at Java, Spring Boots, something like that. Then they're doing about Postgres SQL and again Flutter. A lot of other things that are going to be dealt, and they're going to talk about the database schema and everything, right? How the database is supposed to be done and everything out there. That's going to be given. And once this is done, he's going to hand over it to the operations team. Operations teams is going to deal with them. Let's say they are going to come up with a Jenkins pipeline for that. Right. And once everything development is done, then they're going to push the production, meaning they're launching their app on the Google Play Store. And they're also having the web page set up so that it can be accessed out there. This is the different process. So now you have to understand, remember, I'm bringing security after this, right? So I'm hacking and checking any kind of a process out there, right? One of the early stages issues they faced with DevSecOps is that manpower shortage of, meaning even today, quality, sorry, quality pen testers are very less, and it is still an issue, right? Especially in early stages, for every 1,000 developer that was there was only one penetration test, right? I'm talking about in like 2010, 2011, something like that, because at that time If you talk about 2005 and 2006, even to get a very basic certified ethical hacking course, you need a police verification out there, right? And it was a lot of people have been prosecuted for posting hacking videos and things, which is widely available today. It was much more difficult to talk about at that time. So it becomes much more difficult. All right. So at that time, they wanted to do is that I can't have a single pen tester working on 10 to 15 projects, right? It's very going to be very difficult. So they wanted to bring in automation as well. So DevOps was already picking up. DevSecOps picked up almost immediately after that. Not much because when they started doing DevOps, they found the security was an issue out there. So now there is the requirement phase, there is the design phase, there is the code phase, and right, and there is the test phase. How can I add security in these situations? Right? A lot of people think PT is not required. Penetration testing is still required, and it is mandatory. Right, for many applications, because if you are ISO 27001 certified company, you need to get your organization pen tested at least once in a year, right? And if you're a financial sector organization collecting a lot of physical, financial like credit card and money and things like that, once in 3 months is kind of an default for that part. But that is fine, that is fine. But we don't want a pen tester to identify bugs or vulnerabilities. We want to do it at an earlier stage itself. So how do we go about that process of that? Right? So when you're talking about this is where your knowledge in vulnerabilities comes into play, right? You have to look at from a requirement perspective here. When you're talking about features, you're adding security features also in place, right? What are the security features, right? Instead of after doing a pen testing, coming up with a password policy, right? While designing the application only, I will tell the password should be 8-character long. They should be, salting for the password that should be there. One uppercase letter, one lowercase, one symbol, and one integer should be there as the bare minimum for a password policy. What kind of an authentication are you using? Are you using OAuth? Are you using right JWT? Are you using on normal web token? What are the things that you're going to work on that part, right? There's a lot of other things. Authentication and authorization can be done out here. At that requirement itself, the client itself can ask, or you as an engineer or a product developer, product owner, you can put up these are the requirements that is required from our end, right? Not having to wait from the process that is coming out process, right? In the design phase itself, we are going to take up this consideration and design the application, plus the design is going to contain all this information out here. That is one thing very much important. And in the code review, we'll talk about code reviews. And in the testing, we'll talk basically about VA out there. Vulnerability analysis is done on a every time it has been pushed out there. Okay, so this we can do. So let's continue from there onwards. So meaning we are trying to push at an earlier stages, start looking at security. And now security it is not only part of a penetration testing engineer, that everyone in the organization are involved in cybersecurity process, right? The design phase, it's designed and requirement phase, even the client is discussing about security and things. And it is very important, right? So this we spoke about proactive security. By integrating security from the start, potential vulnerabilities are identified and addressed earlier. So now can you tell me how it is going to be cost effective, right? Rectify. So meaning, let's say my point is, let's say you're having an application, you're already spending money on development, right? By adding one more security into that, the cost should actually add, right? Why is the cost going down out here? Why do you think it is called as a cost effective? Why it is called as a cost effective? right? So for this to understand, we have to understand how programmers or developers are usually charged. They are usually charged on a hour basis, right? For every hour they are going to spend, they are going to take out that. And understand one more thing. More earlier, product is launched, more profit, right? It's going to be there. Let's say you have a product. If you delay your product sales by a month, you're losing 1 month of sales worth of business out there, right? So that is also one of the things we have to look into that component. So now let's understand. Okay. So what usually there is that if you identify a security vulnerability during the design phase, it will cost you $5. This is a random. It is an up. I'm not an exact. This is not an exact numbers. I'm just giving an example of how exactly it goes, right? During the design phase, right? If it is identified during the code phase, it will probably cost you $50. And if it identified in the testing phase, it will cost you 5,500. And it is identified in deployment phase, it will cost you 5,000, right? Breached. We'll talk about that later. All right. So if they identifying a security issue at the design phase, it's okay, this is something I need, we can add into that vulnerability, we can provide some kind of a security process for that. Then it will take only five days. Why? Because that is the time extra spent by a developer or an architect to add that feature into the application of that. But when it comes to the coding phase and you identify there's a vulnerability present that is not been fixed, why does it cost $50 extra approximately? I'm talking because here, whenever you identify something on the code level, you cannot directly go and fix it. You have to go back to the design phase and speak to that person. Then again, you're going to tell him this is what, and then he is going to redesign the process, right? And then it is going to come to the coding and it's going to be fixed. Same thing when you identify a vulnerability in testing, what it is going to go, it need to go to the coding and then it's going to the design and the process picks up again where it is adding a lot of cost. Now, since it was not designed from ground up, I'm putting something in the middle now. This I need to rechange the existing application where it will take more time. More time equals what? More money. That is what is happening out here. So same way, the post deployment, once you identify, once the product got into deployment and into production, it is going to be much higher. I'm just giving 5,000. It can be much more higher out there. Okay. And when it gets breached, it can have a very devastating consequences for that. A lot of companies have ceased to exist after a breach because they have lost everything. A lot of companies have lost a lot of business as well, right? I think one of the main examples we could think about is Target. When Target got hacked big time and they lost a lot of customers, and it happened somewhere around the Christmas time, and people did not purchase any product online on Target, and it led to huge loss, billions and dollars of revenue lost. The amount of money they lost in the breach is less compared to the trust they lost to the customers. The impact of it is on the business, and that is going to be very, very, you know. So again, that is the reason it's cost effective, right? Adding it to the earlier stage, it is going to be very, very cost effective. It is not going to reduce a DevOps project will cost less than a DevSecOps project, but the overall, picture, when you look at it, it is important to have DevSecOps, and it reduces things, much more. And deployment also, it's going to be, sometimes it's going to be more than 5,000. I'm just giving you a random number. I remember I was testing for an application for a bank, right? And this was supposed to go live immediately. And there was a critical vulnerability. We thought we cannot launch it, right? We cannot launch it because there is a vulnerability. It needs to be fixed. Only then we'll allow you to do that part. In banks, compliance are very important. if there is a KYC information involved, know your customer, right? A KYC information involved, they will not launch it. If there's vulnerability which could lead to leaking customer information, they will not launch. And that particular application got delayed, I think by 10 days or 15 days. I'm not exactly sure now. Think about the business they lost, right? This particular application was not designed for normal customers. It was designed for, customers who are having $1 million is the base requirement for that. It was related to investment and things like that. So even having a delayed response to having getting $1 million, you are getting that, but that investment is delayed by a week. That is going to have a huge impact for them, right? So that is how it plays an important role in cost-effective nature. Right, speed. So as I told, same thing, it is going to increase the speed. The main reason is if there is a security vulnerability, I have to stop that application. So if by adding security at earlier stage, it is going to be much more easier, right? For instance, a vulnerability can be categorized into minimum, like it is a critical bug, it is a high severity bug, it is a medium severity bug, and something which is low. And other one more thing is information, right? There will be service level agreement between the developers and the customers telling that if there is a critical bug, it has to be fixed in 48 hours or close the application because that could lead to customer breach and things like that. But again, as soon as it comes down to high, it becomes about 30 days, right? You have to fix that bug in 30 days, and medium you will have around 60 days, and for low you'll have around 90 days. Basically, for low you're telling I'm doing pen testing now, and I'm going to do pen testing after 3 months. When I'm testing for the 3 months later, this should be fixed there, right? And information, there is no time because it is just a basic consideration based on the situation. It would be better option to follow is what it is. Very little. Okay, that is the process out there for you. So this will help you with that process. For what process it's going to help with the speed, by adding, by making sure you're adding frequency out there, you don't have to worry about all this kind of things, right? I've seen people of teams which follow DevSecOps, right? You will see that there is no critical or high vulnerability at all from them when we go for pen testing. It is very difficult for us to find. It is not much that is there, right? There are medium and low, but it is not going to affect their productivity and things like that. That is very much important. Collaborative, enhance collaboration between development, operations, and security. So more resilient software solution. One of the main things here, the problem with why was DevOps came into play? Right? Why was DevOps came into play? Because DevOps came into play because there was no collaboration between the development team, testing team, and the operations team, right? Development used to write the code and push it, and the code was taken by testing and tested. And once any vulnerability, it is fixed out there, not vulnerability, bugs in the application also, then it goes back to the development team. And the operations also, whenever it is being launched into production or testing and things, there is no coherent information, right? So they don't know, everyone is working in their own silos. The developer does not know at a very later stage that there is a bug, critical bug that has to be done. It's not usually like. So DevOps comes into play is that to reduce this impact. So everyone is working and collaborating all the time, and they get to fix the bugs at an earlier stage. But the problem here was again security, right? So now DevSecOps, what happens with DevSecOps is that security is not an afterthought, right? Think about, you have a login functionality and you have come up with an authentication. Okay, come up with an authentication. After it goes into production, I do a penetration testing for that, right? And tell what is my recommendation to change authentication mechanism. They might have used about web tokens, right? Web tokens for authentication. I will come all of a sudden and tell web tokens are old. Go with JWT tokens of that. Now this is going to be very difficult. Going to add up more things. It's very difficult out there. I'll tell you one example, live example, which happened. You know, there are multiple things happened. One of them is there was one web application. This is basically a gaming app, and they have many things like choose the door, right? And then spin this, that other things are there. So what this application has written is, what they have done is, let's say there's one game, right? Game one. If you won, there is a client message going to the server telling that the username, right? Username, let's say Karthik only is there, and result is won or lost, right? Whether you won that game or lost that game, who's doing it? It is done by your front end code, which is a big mistake of that. Right? The game logic is excellent and everything. Since they're using a React, right? It is able to do a lot of other things. But the hacker, what he did was he identified that the decision for that result was done on the client end. What he did, he captured the request before sending it to the server. Whenever he lost, he changed it to 1 and send it. And server saw that, okay, this particular username has won it and put a money into his account. And within half an hour of the website being lost, they lost about $50,000. So now they came back to us and asked, told that this is what we lost, $50,000, and we brought the web app down. Okay, because we were losing money, we are not able to control it. We don't know what's happening. What is going to do all that? All right. So now when we went through it, we understood this is what is happening all that. It's quite easy for me to make modification to that, and someone is doing that the process of that. And the recommendation was this result production one or done has to be made on the server end, right? The result, the calculation of the game should be run on the server end, and the result should also be taken care of by the server itself. After giving this recommendation, they completely shut down. Why? Because now changing the logic and taking all the code from the client end to the server end, it means a complete redesign of the application. So they shut down the complete application from the website. When the website was down for a couple of months, rewrote the entire application and they relaunched it. Right. The reason why this happened was they came to us once they got hacked. They never considered security at the process itself. If they had done this design phase itself, the security consultation, collaborated at design phase itself, a security engineer was involved in design phase itself, probably it would have taken him just 5 minutes to tell this logic is wrong. We should not go with this. This has to be done on the server end, right? And this was a major problem. They lost a lot more money than $50,000, right? Think about a couple of months, the website was down, they lost the customers and things. It will have a lasting impression on the impact on the organization. So it is important, right? DevSecOps brings that collaborative much more earlier. The teams are interacting with security at an earlier stage and getting things done. That's how it is. Right? So how do we spoke about now, we're thinking about, right? How do we add this security in different stages, right? What are the things that we have to do out there? I will come to the design phase at an later stage when we talk about threat modeling, right? We talk about threat modeling, we'll come to a later stage. But we'll talk about different other things that can be done, right? One of the main things that can be done is code analysis, right? Larger teams, very big teams will do what is called as a manual code review, right? And you have to be very careful when you're applying for jobs. Check out if it is a manual code review because this requires experience in development and security, right? You're manually looking at the code, reviewing the code, where the controls are there and things. You, unless until you can read someone's code and understand what's happening, it is going to be very difficult. Even if you know what you're doing, it is a difficult task altogether, right? Not many projects will go into those process of that, right? Any critical projects will look into that. But what happens? SAST basically stands for, static analysis, security testing. Right here, what we're doing is we're taking the code and putting it through a scanner, right? And this scanner can be like a sonar cube, right? And it will identify if there are any vulnerabilities of the code trouble. And every time what is happening, whenever a code is being merged, a PR is raised, pull request, and the code is merged from the developer to the main branch, right? And before it goes to it is built out there. What is going to happen, right? Before it is built, I'm going to review the code review. If there is a vulnerability, what is going to be designed is that we can block the build. The build will fail. It will not work at all. Okay, so that is how it is going to be there. And nowadays, with the use of AI, right, a lot of companies are able to build. I think if the organization is having enough funding, they can build their own AI model to do this activity. SonarQube is widely used, right? I think GitLabs are coming up with their own AI-based code review system now, where it will automatically review for any version things and things. And it will be able to identify vulnerabilities well in advance. Okay, but this kind of a PT is always required, guys. Penetration testing is always required. Why? Still, we don't have proper testing even in the field of AI and other things. Authentication and authorization is still basically very difficult to test. It has to be done manually, right? But here I'm just looking at the code. Is there any vulnerabilities that are there that we can think about, right? So that is important. Second thing that comes into play is SCA. Software composition analysis. What basically here it is doing is it is looking at all the dependencies. All right. So let's say you might have seen about whenever you're developing an app, let's say you're building a front end for that, the React. Along with the React, we are actually building a lot of dependencies are built and need to be identified and installed before doing that part, right? Especially when you're doing Django project, there are a lot of other dependencies that you're installing along with the Django, right? Let's say for it running your project, you require Django and built-in products like other things, pandas and things. A lot of other supporting software needs to be there. If you remember in the first security session, we spoke about where are the vulnerabilities that is going to be coming. One is there in your code level, you are making mistake. So that is taken care by SAS testing out there. Second place where the vulnerabilities is going to be taken care is configuration. Right, that is taken care by your scanners, infrastructure scanners that is going to be there. And third one we saw was, third party tools, right? And this that's also involves the dependence that are there. Right? This is going to be there. If there is any vulnerability, let's say there is a vulnerability in Django, Python framework for running web application. This cannot be identified in the SAS tab. The why SAS is not checking for vulnerabilities in Django. It is only going to look at your code level itself, but in the code that is not going to be there, right? For this, there are a lot of other tools that are there that is coming into play for managing this. Okay, there are a lot of other tools that is coming into play. That is, I need to know what are the dependencies that I'm using, and I'm using the latest one or not, right? So one example you can think about is jQuery, right? jQuery that is there. Just give me an example. Let me think. For instance, jQuery is something that is used for front end, and you can see that the latest version is they're using 3.7.1, right? It's a stable version that is going to be there. But if you see, there's a vulnerability list for jQuery. jQuery is this particular module is having a lot of vulnerabilities. But we can see here that the large older one that was having a vulnerability is 3.4.0, right? 3.4.0. Before that, it was no vulnerabilities were identified. Okay. After that, there is no new vulnerabilities. What if your application is using jQuery version 3.4, right? You have done the configuration of all your service properly. There's no vulnerabilities. The code is written by excellent developers. There are no vulnerability in that part. But because you're using a vulnerable third-party app, that will introduce hackers to gain access to your application. But how will I know? Will the developer every week they will look for all the developer dependencies online and check any vulnerability is there, or I can automate it, right? So this is where automation comes into play, right? One of the tools is sync is there, and VAPT dependency check also is there. Why is dependency check? Both of them can be either one of them can be used to identify the vulnerabilities in the third-party component, and this will give you right covers a lot. So that is how you're going to identify vulnerabilities. Now, let's say jQuery, I can found there is a vulnerability on this. Either I can do is upgrade to 3.7 version, or I can do is remove jQuery, right? This is how it's going to be. But this is going to be identified well in advance, right? Because every time, how often the code is going to be pushed? In an agile methodology, the code is what we see is that the code is going to be pushed almost every day. So every day there is a new merge that is going to be SAST is going to be done. Then again, we're going to do the SC as well, going to check for anything, right? And next component is DAST, right? Basically, DAST is a web application scanner. Just like your infrastructure scan is running, I'll give it a domain name. It will run the scan and it will identify any vulnerabilities like WAVAS top 10. It will check for XSS vulnerability, CSRF, right? SQL injection. All those things are going to be identified here and it's going to be posted out. That is what it is going to do. DAST is probably the most easier one. It is usually not run with your a lot of places. If you see, they'll tell they're running it in the pipeline, but I think you should not run it in with the pipeline, right? I think we should run it separately. It is not something you run. So when we're talking about SAST, right? Predominantly, what is going to happen? You write the code, right? Let's say you're writing about 2 pages of code today. That is going to be tested because when it's getting uploaded, tomorrow you're going to run 2 pages of code. And I think when you're doing it for the second time, it is not going to scan all 4 pages, right? It is going to scan only the 2 new pages that are coming into play, and other older one has been there, right? Because that is what usually it has been configured. I think probably you can configure it for both to scan, but that does not occur every time. When you're running the pipeline, whatever the new code that is coming in, that is going to be scanned out. You don't want to be scanning because it, see, understand cost is also important out here. The more processing, the more cost is going to be high, right? And especially if you're running your infra on cloud, you have to be very careful how you're designing the application, how it's running, what activities you're running and everything, because it will, the cost will go spiral very significantly fast, right? A very small feature we removed in one of the application, it brought down the cost immediately by $200. Right, this is a significant amount. This is a significant amount that comes, and we're talking about 10% of the cost, which is not required at all. Right, which is not required at all. That was enabled by the cloud engineer because he thought, he did not pay attention. In short, I can tell is that, and it costed at that much level. Right, every day, every month, it's been running. So it ran for more than 15 months. Even if you're taking 12 months, we're costing around $2,400 because of that feature, which is not going to be used at all. Right. So you have to be careful how you are designing the application in security as well. Okay, but SaaS has to be done. SC has to be done every time you're doing out there. Right, Dash is something you can do it at a later stage. Right, probably Dash can be done once in a week. You can do an independent scan the application. You'll have much more better control. Let one of the administrators run. It can be possible to do it on the pipeline. I'm not telling it can't be done, but I would not recommend it because Dash is not going to, it is going to redo the entire application again and again. It's not like a SAST where it is going to do only the new delta that has been introduced. That's not there. No. Right? So these are the different tools that are there, right? And for security also, there are quite a bit of tools that are available out there. Okay. So guys, any questions till now? Any questions, guys? Anyone having any questions?
No, sir. No, sir.
Thank you. See, security predominantly, as we are going further and further down, more and more is that we were seeing security was more in from a source code analysis that is being done, right? And nowadays, we don't need these additional tools that are coming in play. Your code repository itself are making that action much more easier for them, right? As soon as it will not wait for the production to be put into a build and then verify source code analysis. That is not going to be there because GitHub and GitLabs are able to do source code analysis while it is pushed to in the repo itself, not wait for the pipeline to be triggering for that component of them. That is one thing that is happening. It keeps on evolving out there, right? And Jenkins, a lot of people have moving back to Jenkins. What we have seen in the industry, they were there with GitLabs and things. They're moving back to Jenkins mainly because a lot more functionality has been supported on Jenkins than GitLabs. And Azure was cost effective earlier. Nowadays, they've made it much more. Almost everything is paid. That's going to be an issue, right? And again, JMeter is also picking up again. So a lot of people want to do performance testing and things. So that is how they want to do what is the threshold limit. So basically, JMeter can be used for checking, what is the transaction limit my application can take, right? I can know if I send 10,000 packets in short span of time, how the application is, behave. If I send 100,000 packets, how it's going to behave and things like that. Right. I remember in one of the applications we were testing, uh, we tested for about, it was a using JMeter only we did. We tested for about 30 million concurrent sessions, right? How does the application is going to be, because that was foreign, one of the TV shows, national big TV shows, and every time then the before going on a break they would put up a quiz and people are going to access that particular website or an app and they're going to interact with the server. So we want to check out with that part, right? And artifactory is very important, not from what it's going to is that how do you secure the artifacts, right? So what do you mean by an artifact out here? Anyone has any idea? So basically artifacts, it may be your APK files or iOS, Android application, sorry, iOS apps or Apple apps, or it could be your you know your Java applications, right? Binaries that are going to be there usually, or it could be your jar files that are there and things like that. Whenever the application is built, there is an output for that, and that is what is going to be jar file out there. Right, so every day you're building and the new jar file is created and new versions is going to be added out there. Where are you going to store those versions, older versions of jar file? Are you going to hold on to them? Are you going to delete them? What is that you're going to do? Right, along with that, what you're going to do with the log files. When you run the applications, it is important for us to have log files, right? Where do you secure those log files, and things are important that comes into play, because if there is an authentication breach or if someone is trying to do brute force, these log files might have that information stored, which could be analyzed later to identify who did that part, right? So how do you, what are you going to do with those log files? That also we need to taking into consideration. So we need to store it. Usually, you might store it in S3 bucket online, but it would be nowadays people are moving to on-prem servers, right? They will run the development server, right, on-prem, but they'll run the production on cloud, right? Because on-prem devices can be, right, where I have seen a lot of my clients, right, they do run development servers on their office floors. The problem is the internet connectivity is not fast. It is quite fluctuating. It could be power issues and things and all they are faced, power outages. It may not happen in US, but happens in the rest of the world. Uh, all those things will make up cost, right? You don't want your production server to go be offline couple of minutes a day. Even for a couple of minutes a day, it is a big problem out there, right? So production servers are pushed in AWS, and deployment server, development servers, and testing are done on-prem. This will bring down the cost significantly. Right? This will bring down the cost significantly. We saw in one of our clients, the development server and testing server, they bring it to production in their on-prem, right? The cost of the server which they're running on every day was actually the 1 month AWS cost of running development and production. And they now in their on-prem, they're running about 50 servers, right? 50 VMs running different services in that. They're doing able to do that process of them. So here, but will the cost here is little bit is that from an salary perspective for the operations team. They needed to get one more person into play to manage all those new servers. But overall it is more cost effective, right? Even it brings down your AWS pricing significantly. In a couple of months' time, you'll be saving about 50% of price. And monitoring, yes, Splunk is good. What we see, there are a lot of other tools that are there. Prometheus can be used as well for monitoring your activities and services. But still, monitoring is not something. Log collection is important so that something breach is there, you can do analysis. But monitoring, small and medium-sized organization, they don't much, because it's again it brings up the cost, right? You need to have a very good infrastructure configuration done properly for it to be done properly, right? So finally is the threat modeling part that will come into play, right? So what do you mean by threat modeling? Right? Threat modeling is a family of activities for improving security by identifying threats and defining countermeasures to prevent or mitigate the effects of a threat to the system. A threat is a potential or an actual undesirable event that could be malicious, such as a DOS attack or incidental or failure of storage device. Threat modeling is planned activity for identifying and assessing application threats and vulnerabilities. So what example perspective I can think about is you can see a lot of Hollywood movies where there is an presidential assassination movies where they try to assassinate a country president or anything. You will see that before any president comes into out to do a speech or do any activities outside, well in advance, a security team will go into play, right? And they will see what are the different threats they could face, right? Where are the attackers could come in from, right? There could be snipers in place. There could be, someone trying to, do a rocket launch and things and all. They can perceive any type of threat that could happen out there, and then they will design the security in that process. Right? If something is they think they cannot provide security, they will not have that event at all. Okay, they will never take that risk, but they will think about every possible way a bad person can have an impact in that event out there, who can breach security and things like that. Right? So threat modeling is similar to that, right? When you're dealing with an application, right? Define safety requirements. What is the bare minimum security that is required, right? Because we cannot keep security is a costly effect. The more things you add, the more expensive it is going to become, right? But at the same time, you have to understand here what is that you're securing out here. The point is, let's say, simple example. Let's say you have a box of chocolates, and then you have a box full of jewelry, right? Are you going to take your box of chocolates and store it in a safe, or are you going to put it in a refrigerator for safekeeping on them, right? In some cases, you can get a lock for the refrigerator and lock the refrigerator, right? So, are you going to same way for your jewelry? Are you going to put it in the safe or in the refrigerator, right? The reason why we put chocolates in the refrigerator, not in the safe, is it does not require that much security, right? Running a safe is much higher than the cost of chocolates, and it is of not that importance also, right? Whereas jewelry is more important. So building a security, it entirely depends on what is that you're securing. Correct. So let's say a lot of these apps which will do nowadays. Previously, one of the major drawbacks for a lot of companies to go online, they set up their online presence for their business was the PCI DSS. So meaning if you're collecting your customer's credit card information, there's a bare minimum amount of security you're supposed to provide in your application, and storing the data and everything has to be very accurate. You can't do that. That prevented a lot of companies from setting up their online business and things like that. Now, as soon as third-party payment gateway came into play, like Stripe and it may be Razorpay or a lot of other things, that removed that particular process. Why? The companies are using that particular API for doing the payment thing, and they never store the customer information. Who is storing it? The third-party payment gateway is going to take responsibility for that. They're going to charge a certain amount for each transaction, but that is how it's going to work for you. All right, so that is how it goes. So now I don't have to worry about securing that other data that are there, right? Financial data. If I'm having information like house address, phone number, and name, the security requirement for that is less compared if I'm storing a credit card information on that, right? So that is much more important. So defining safety requirements, understanding what is that we are securing and how much security is needed for that, right? And how much security is needed for that, it basically you can check up the compliance like ISO or PCI data, they'll talk about data classification. What is the data and what is what level, right? Is your credit card number critical data or a normal data? All those things that is going to be defined out there. And second thing is that we have to identify the likely threats, right? So if you're having an on-prem server, one of the likely threats is anyone can come and pull the hard drive and get away with the hard drive, which will have all the data, Are you sure you want that to happen out there? And right, that's very much possible. That's likely threat. A talk about XSS attack or in a web application, DDoS attack is possible out there. So that are the likely threats that is happening out there. But then we have to threat assessment, right? What are the chances of certain thing that could occur, right? Let's say in a physical server, someone is coming and pulling the hard drive and going. What are the chances of that occurring out there, right? The chances is very, very less, and DDoS is also less compared to other things, right? Whereas an XSS attack or it could be SQL injection that is more prevalent out there. So now we have to come up with other things that could play, right? Think about a threat assessment where it involves someone coming and pulling the server and taking it, walking away with server, physical server. That is very, very less, right? So then again, we have understood for that mitigation, then we'll come up with a mitigation for that, right? For physical security, we can think about is having a server room separate, dedicated for that. And it is having an proper door is there and that is properly isolated from the rest of the office, and proper lock mechanism and logs for who is accessing the server room, what time, for how long he is spent out there, right? The key management, access management plays an important role. For DDoS, again, you can set a particular threshold, you can set up a firewall for that and things for that part, right? And again, for web application, doing a PT and things, all those things we are going to do for this process, right? And password management is also one of the threats you can possibly think about. What is the importance of having an password policy, complexity of the password, how often you're changing the password, right? That is there. And what is the mitigation for that part, right? Confirmation of threat mitigation. So that is confirmation of threat mitigation can only be done by red teaming activity. That is your penetration testing and someone trying to break into your server room physically. That is where it's going to be there, right? So let's look at the threat modeling again from an other perspective, right? 80% of the attacks that is going to occur on a daily basis that we see, the initial instigation place is going to be a phishing mail out there that is going out there. Someone in the organization is clicking on something, a mail which is not supposed to be clicked on, and that leads to the breach. Okay. So the point is that someone is trying to click on it. So the losing of authentication data, that particular user may enter the username and password. That is there. What is the likely of that threat is very high, right? Even if there are 100 employees, even one person is clicking on the link, it is still very high. Okay. So what is the impact? Impact is going to be very high. They can compromise their credentials and someone can get into the organization network. Probably he will escalate from there to hack into the main server. What if this one person that clicked is the administrator itself, right? He'll have access to the entire process, right? Entire service. So what are the best mitigation process for this is first line of defense is very simple. Security awareness training. You have to take your employees, give them awareness training once in 3 months, constantly check what is, probably questionnaire for them and train them that you should not click on unwanted emails and things like that, right? And probably you can run a phishing campaign. You can employ companies like us where we can run a phishing campaign on the organization. We'll send out the fake emails and see how many people are going to click on it, right? If people click on it, we'll do a security awareness training once more. If not, it's well and good. So that is where a threat modeling goes into play, different scenarios and for different scenarios. Same thing for web, which is for infrastructure, same thing everywhere. We're doing the same set of activities out there. So defense in depth. The next concept is defense in depth. Just guys, give me 1 minute. Give me 1 minute, guys. Sorry, guys. So any questions in threat modeling? Okay. So next concept is defense in depth. Defense in depth is strategy that leverages multiple security measures to protect against organization assets. Thinking this as in if one line of defense is compromised, additional layer exists as a backup to ensure that threats are stopped along the way. It is also considered security issue caused due to human neglect and behavior. Right. So if someone is doing the process, this can also be done with them. Right? So one simple example for the phishing attack we just right, authentication bypass is that one mechanism we can go a much more deeper process is having an OTP into the process, right? It is not that difficult to break an OTP from an hacker's perspective, but if it is something to, uh, fool a user into doing some activity, this can actually bring in an alert into him, right? Someone is trying to do a bank transfer, they'll add a malicious link to a link and click that link. It could transfer some amount of money. What if you tied it to an SMS OTP process? Now you're getting an OTP in your system. Then you can finally realize, okay, something is happening out there. Probably I clicked on the wrong link. You can reach out to the organizations and things like that, right? It will not completely eliminate the attack, but instead of 100 people getting, be a victim of that particular actions, it can reduce it to 20 or even 15 people or 10 people out there. It still happens. It's not going to be there. The breaches are happening at much more frequent these days than before, and it is because of more and more. The reason is not attackers are getting sophisticated. Yes, they're getting more sophisticated, but also is that more and more applications are online now, right? It is much more easier, so more vulnerabilities will be there and things like that, right? So defense in depth is basically having a multi-layer approach, right? As you can see, there's an onion here. What happens in an onion? There is multi-layer, right? If you want to go to the core of the onion, you have to peel off the outer layers and then go into the core of the same thing of them. In a house perspective, if you can think, let's say if you're going on a vacation, what are you going to do? You're going to lock your main door, you're going to lock your room door, then you're going to lock the wardrobe where your safe is, and then inside that there is a safe, and that safe is going to be locked as well. Are you going to think that safe is locked? I don't have to worry, no one is going to come in. There's nothing precious there in the house, so I can keep everything open and go. No, right? So when each layer is added out there, each door is added out there, it will take more time for a thief to break into that. So you'll have time to respond to mitigate that kind of an attack out there. All right. In an organization, when we're talking about multi-layer approach, right? So you're having Active Directory, right? In some cases for user management. You will have encryption for disk, right? So that even if the laptop is stolen, the data not lost. Data is not lost. Then you're having firewall. Then you're having web application firewall out there. Then a lot of other things are there, right? So we do, network segmentation is going to be there. The more and more things you're going to add in an application level, you're having multi-factor authentication like OTP, right? Then again in passwords, you're having salt. right? Then again, you're having other things as well. Pepper also something you're talking about nowadays. Salt we spoke about recently in password management. For that, it is a lot of things that you keep on adding out there, right? And nowadays we're talking about zero trusters, where no one is trusted. So previously, with the current scenario, let's say someone is having their organization username and password, we are thinking, we're trusting their laptop. Someone is connecting from the organization laptop. They are not compromised. They are friendly. All right. In a zero trust, no one is trusted. Even an employee connecting from the organization laptop, sending using proper username and password also are not going to be trusted. They are going to be constantly reviewed out there. Right. For instance, what is going to do is that, let's say there'll be some kind of an app that is going to be installed on your laptop. Okay, and it is going to check your security, right? It will check whether the disk is encrypted, right? And what kind of an authentication you're using out there. Is the screen lock mechanism enabled out there? There's a lot of things. So it will give a rating for the system. Okay, when you connect to the organization server, if the rating is below a certain point, it will not allow that the laptop to connect to the organization network at all. Meaning it is telling by default, I don't trust anyone out there. Why? Sometimes what will happen, there will be no antivirus in that part, right? This will fail because if there's no antivirus, they cannot prevent any one virus getting infected, and that virus initiating the connection, that cannot be prevented of that. So if the virus, this particular app will know in the laptop, is the virus antivirus updated, is up to the mark or not, and all that information is done. If it is failing for any of it, it will not allow for that. This person is entering the actual username and password. They're using the company thing. This information is there, that particular laptop. I should allow. The rules and regulations are there to allow for that part. But a lot of other things. So this is where the zero trust comes into play, where we're going much more deeper. Where we're going much more deeper out there, right? So no one is trusted. Everything has to be authenticated. It's not like, let's say if you go to an office, there may be multiple floors. You got your organization ID card with you. It does not mean that you are going to be allowed to all the floors, right? You will be allowed to only certain floors. Nowadays, they are going to make it, your server room may be in one section of the second floor. Then you'll tell again there is a higher security coming in there. Multi-factor authentication comes into play. Everything has to be granularly tested and done out there. That is what defense in depth basically about. Much more going much more deeper, asking a lot of other things out there. We already spoke about code reviews, right? But again, one more thing we also have to look is that access control to the code is very much important. Uh, Pull request reviews are done. So let's say one of the major problems, an access review has to be done, right? Is not something. DevOps is not only is predominantly about running a pipeline and getting things done. DevSecOps is not just about what we are seeing. It is constantly transitioning from an only pipeline perspective to do a lot of other activities as well, right? So now you have a GitLab repo or GitHub repo there. You have to constantly check for access reviews as well. Who is having access to that? Is the employees, all the developers, let's say one developer was working on your project, he moved on to a different project, right? So he's been given access to the new Git repo for the newer project. But why is his access to the current one has not been removed? That is very important. You could be taking that code out of there and pushing it to somewhere else. And sometimes what is going to happen, it has happened in real time, where the employees have downloaded the code from the GitLab and given it to someone else out there, right? Sold it to the competitors. All those things has happened out there. So we have to think about that. Whenever you're doing pull request reviews and things, they have to be, code has to be reviewed and changed, right? Prevent force pushes, ensure. So again, one more thing what we can do is that not giving a particular access to that part. right? A developer can push for a pipeline that is designed for the development environment, but he cannot push the code or merge the code or build the code for a production level. So there will be only one person, probably the team lead or the team manager, who can technical manager who can take that code, review everything is working in development and testing. Only then he'll push that code to the production environment. So that has to also be to be done very careful, right? Then again, security advisor keeps on posting. You need to have an internal method for discussing about the latest vulnerabilities, how they can fix it. Uh, so then again, GitHub is having something, GitHub Dependabot, where automatically check for dependencies and update and secure. Uh, some companies, they're using tools like Olama and things like that for doing the code review, where it will recommend and things like that, along with SonarQube, right? SonarQube will identify any vulnerabilities, but code quality, it is starting to look into that part, right? We are going to see a lot of changes in GitHub DevOps factors, and especially in DevSecOps in coming time. A constant changes, a lot of tools are up and running nowadays. So we'll see. But one of the thing is dependencies we can be checked out there. Right? So container security. So what do you mean by a container? Right? So usually when you're running a Docker image, previously we spoke about vulnerabilities in the third-party application, vulnerabilities in your code, and vulnerabilities in the configuration, right? And this can be identified when you're running a Nessus scanner or things like that. But what if there's vulnerability in your Docker image itself? What are you going to do with that? What if the isolation is not done properly? The way we have configured the containers may be there, but lack of isolation, basically this is a vulnerability in the application itself that can be fixed by updating it, because it may be possible, right? One of the reasons why we have containers is that one application data should remain with that container itself, which should not be accessible to the other container, right? If you go from an app perspective, one mobile app should not take data from the other mobile app. We should have some kind of an isolation out there, right? There will have some, let's say SMS and things like that, that every app will be given access to whoever is permission is given. They can share the data, right? If the app A is given SMS permission, app B is given SMS permission, both can look into that SMS. For instance, let's say you may be having two banks, right? One may be Wells Fargo and one may be Bank of America. For receiving OTPs, both have been given access to the SMS. Will the other bank be able to see your SMS for the other bank? Let's say Bank of America can see Wells Fargo Bank's SMSs. Probably yes, right? The way it has been designed, it is totally possible out there. That is why you see Microsoft Authenticator comes into play. A lot of authenticator apps are there because that data cannot be shared with the other app at that time. But when you get from an SMS, that is possible to be shared out there. Okay. So isolation is basically that. So making sure the data in one container remains in that container itself, right? Privilege escalation and things and all that could totally be possible. Container, the usually it occurs here is the container itself is having a vulnerable components inside that. So that has to be very careful. So in our course, we spoke about something like it to, best make sure trusted images. So we are talking about downloading the latest images from the Docker Hub before you could build, then scanning those images for any vulnerabilities, because these images will have built-in tools as well. There will be a lot of it comes with pre-installed software. Even they have to be up to date out there, right? So making sure containers run with the minimum privilege they need to function. Don't give any access permissions. Make sure they don't have access to the file system which they are not required. Give them access to a particular folder, right? Properly monitor their activities and make sure you regularly update, right? And this can be done when you're doing the pipeline process out there. When you're building the images and pushing the data into the containers, and always make sure you're building from the latest images itself, or constantly check for new images if you are not done. Certain times, let's say you may be running Ubuntu container 22.04 container, and the latest one is 24.04, right? If you run the pipeline with the latest, automatically when the newer one is come, it is going to start taking up that. It may not be good one, good approach, because your code might break in 24.04 because the packages are updated and something is fixed. That may not be ideal out there, right? So they'll always go for the hard code, the number, which version you want that part. But you will have to constantly keep in check, and probably you can run the development environment in the latest version and run the production in a stable version. That could be very useful for that. And access control. Here, access control has to be for everything, right? We're talking about cloud access. After having cloud access, again, there's going to be VM access is going to be there. In the VM should be encrypted. That is going to be there. Then again, what is the we have to monitor the user actions as well, right? This is something. If someone is running a pseudo permission kind of a program, something that has to be tracked and reported as well. So all of these things we have to look into the process. Right. So container security tools, they are Encore, right? Micro scanner and 3D scanners are available out there, right? Training and awareness is very important, right? A lot of times what people think is security awareness training is going to be there for the normal awareness training is there for the all the employees are going to be there, right? For someone is in their front desk who's doing it, security guards that are there, and people are working in sales and marketing, that's going to be there, right? They're supposed to do what is there. But we should also understand security training is required for IT technicals as well, right? Developers will have secure code review training, secure coding practices training out there. An operations team or the server team will have how do they secure their servers. That training has to be given out there. Someone who's working on the pipeline, they should be trained out there how to secure the pipeline. There are cases. What happens is that they have done a very good pipeline process, which is secure and everything. But we were able to get inside the organization, able to compromise because their Jenkins pipeline was not the tool, the server which where Jenkins pipeline was running was not secure, right? And once we got into that, and they were using default applications, they used default username and password or a weak password out there. We were able to compromise, get the code review access for that, and do a lot of other things, right? So all those things can be done. It's very dangerous. So training everyone in this field and not only a global security awareness training is not sufficient. That's very important, right? So as we are seeing out here, we see there is going to be a significant increase in job markets for particular DevSecOps role. And one more thing, what we are seeing is your traditional DevOps role are moving towards DevSecOps roles, right? If you're someone who's working on DevOps, they're expecting you to pick up security as well, try to implement those security tools and things. We have seen in migration, how do we add things into the component? Recently, we worked on a project. They were running on GitLabs. They wanted to move back to Jenkins because their clients are still working on Jenkins, and they wanted to have that uniformity, right? Because they're doing a lot of activities in the pipeline, not just building the application. They're doing a lot of code reviews, access reviews, and things are also in that. So all those things has to be done, right? It took about almost 6 to 7 weeks for it to complete one pipeline migrating from GitLabs to Jenkins back. Previously it was done, but it is. But now, along with that, one of the reasons it took more time than it was anticipated is we were also integrating security tools into that, and the developers have to change the way they are working on it because the code review and the other things are coming up. The builds are failing. They have to understand there's a lot of cultural shift that happens out there, right? And probably we think it will take about another months 1 month's time before it could be completely, it's running, right? But for it to be completely adapted, it will take time. People will not get used to it. So DevOps, if you're seeing people less job openings for DevOps, it's not that DevOps jobs are going down. It is just that they are migrating towards DevSecOps, right? So now completely it is going to be moving into that. Try to understand from that perspective. We are going to see a lot more as we go further. AI introduction into the DevOps is much more, it's happening much more. We are much more dependent on it. One of the major places where we've seen, right, uh, the freshers who are working or someone with less experience is working on DevOps, where AI is very useful for them is writing the pipeline code, right? They can prompt if they know what has to be, how to write a prompt for the AI. You can ask Gemini AI or ChatGPT write a Jenkins pipeline. It will write very right nicely. All right. It brings down your cost significantly, but that's how it's going to go. Adding AI into that mix will also add that part. But I don't think so DevSecOps market is going to go further. It is going to go even further up, than anticipated, which is that. Okay. So any questions, guys? I think we come to the end of the slide here today, end of the session. Any questions?
How many days internship is going on, sir?
Probably another 2 more weeks for this internship, Sumit. Probably this was only for probably we'll have one more session. I think firewall was not done. We'll work on the firewall. Then we'll talk about cloud security, like what we spoke about DevOps today. And then probably we'll wind up for that. Then we'll start again after some time break. The session is going to start again.
Thank you,
Hope
sir.
that answers. You're welcome.
And is
Any
this
other questions? Yeah, please.
any job opportunity after the done this internship?
So, sir, Devish sir, probably you can answer that.
Actually, this is not about a job. Not a job training. We have a job training outside. This is a free internship training. This is just for the building your awareness. Many people doesn't have a solid know-how of where to start, what to start with. And that is the main purpose. And in this, we have expanded the purpose to for a broader aspect to get give more than the awareness part of it. We discuss a lot of things apart from that.
Correct. So one
It's
of the main
like
things.
just like fundamental, right?
Yeah. So usually what happens, Sumit, is from a course perspective, there's a lot more intensities involved out there. We go much more detail into the components, and then again, the work from your end is also going to be there, right? Amount of work you'll do when you do the main course. One of the things is that not everyone may be interested in putting that much effort. I know they might find it difficult to put that much effort. So when we do this internship opportunity, they are able to see, okay, these are the topics that may be covering in the top in the main course. Probably is it the right one to go or not, right? So it gives them an idea. It is not like blindly or jumping into the. We don't want students to blindly jump into the course and then thinking probably it may not be a good idea. So this gives them. So this is the topics. This is the industry. These are the actions I need to perform in my duties in my organization, and how do I approach this? That is the reasoning for this internship. So,
Hello, sir.
yes, Abhi.
So, will we get live projects to work on it?
Not in the internship, Abhi, but in the main project, main course, we'll do work on live things. We do have predominantly about 70% practicals is what we believe in. 70 to 80% we believe in that.
Okay, sir.
Any other questions, guys?
So similarly, we are in another 15 minutes, we are going to start the third session on in DevOps. So we are basically going to continue with AWS Cloud, the second part. The link remains the same. So if you want to continue or if you want to join back is also fine.
Thank you guys for the wonderful session. Any questions, please ask. You can ask not only today, you can ask at a later stage in the WhatsApp group as well. Will me or Debbie